The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
And Jesus went through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." And he called to him his 12 disciples, and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out, and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
And my favorite part of the Paul Harvey show was the rest of the story. He would always tell this little snippet, but everything would get topsy-turvy, everything would turn around, everything would change by knowing the rest of the story. Those were wonderful ways of inspiring and shocking, of calling to account. There's so many wonderful ways that you can listen to those now yourself on YouTube. You can just hunt up the rest of the story with Paul Harvey and get yourself reinvigorated with some of those wonderful tales and the ways in which he would tell it. There is, in the Bible, in the way we read the Bible, there is always the rest of the story too. And by that I mean to say, with as much power and conviction as the fun way that Paul Harvey would explain things, that it doesn't make sense. The story will not come together, does not hold, if you don't have the rest of the story. The rest of the story, just to get it out of the way, unlike Paul Harvey and keep you in suspense the whole time, is it's for you. That everything of who God is and what he has done, the rest of the story is, it is for you. And once you know that, once you've got the rest of the story, that everything of God is yours, that everything he gave in Jesus is for you. Once you get that, once you have that, not just in knowledge, but in having him too, oh, the world opens up in fresh and new ways. So as we are in this part of the scriptures that bring to point for us what it is to be a disciple, we are now in our second little piece of this puzzle, and you're going to see that there is a rest of the story all along the way, and it will be for you too. First, do you see in this first half of the text, verses 35 through 36, you see that there are sheep in a name before you, that these sheep of Israel, these are like lost sheep. They are harassed and helpless. Jesus sees them that way. And you know, I'm going to make it point right to you that Jesus sees you this way, that he cares about you and has compassion for you, but that you might hear it with some real conviction that it's yours, no matter your feelings and your ideas about yourself, that you see yourself as God sees you now. So let's get into that piece of it a little bit. If you want to know the rest of the story about being lost sheep, harassed and helpless sheep, you've got to know the Good Shepherd, the one who sees you that way. Now, We know what it is to feel like a sinner. We've talked about that and shared that just last week with Matthew the tax collector. You heard it spoken to you plain as day from the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 5. How we are weak, how we are ungodly, how we are sinners. But, you are told in that same passage, at that time, just while Matthew was a tax collector, and a pretty ferocious one by the title he gives himself, that he calls you, he loves you, he died for you at that time. So let's just think about the depth of this. So Jesus sees you, just as he saw the children of Judah, just as he sees all the people in the world. And he knows all about you. Yes, that's very clear. Harassed and helpless are the words here. Harassed means when you feel a little bit of skin coming off of you. When you got someone taking a knife to you. You might feel like they're picking at you. You might feel like they're skinning you whole. That's what the word harassed is. Whenever you've gotten a wound, whether light and so external, he knows. He sees that, and he has compassion. How about the next word, helpless? That's when you've got no power in you. You can't even stand. You're laying on the ground. You're thrown down to the ground, and you can't move. You're helpless, utterly helpless, hopeless. Who even sees you or knows you and wants you in such a weak state? Jesus does. But it's not just that he knows all about your pains and sufferings. He knows not just about all of your sins even. It's who he is. He says he's going to take care of these sheep who are so hurt. That he's going to be the good shepherd. Now, the rest of the story then is Jesus, the good shepherd, was treated how? How was the good shepherd, who sees all, knows all, loves, cares, and is moved with compassion for all of your sin and weakness and death? What does Jesus do? But he goes to his own, loves his own, but they receive him not. They cast him out. They crucify him. They shout for his crucifixion. This is the Good Shepherd. That's the rest of the story. And he's willing to be that kind of Good Shepherd precisely for you. You know that, don't you? That he goes to the cross for you. What a wonder. What an amazing wonder that you have a Good Shepherd like that. And he's yours. You can go to him anytime, and he comes to you all the time. And he proclaims his nearness to you and his love for you. That's who he is. Second, you see at the end of this 37 verse, go back just one more slide, Karen, just for a little bit. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. You'll note that the first thing Jesus asks of his disciples, as he points out this need, and the word is disciples there in verse 37. So those who are called to follow him, that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And then he says, here's what you shall do. The first thing you do is you pray. And pray earnestly. Pray zealously. Beg with all your heart for the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. And we'll go on to the next slide. With this harvest, with it being so great and the laborers being so few, you might say, well, that's a problem. But look what happens after that prayer. Look what happens after Jesus in verse 1 gives authority. So two things occur. These disciples who are just now named for you. This is the first time they're all collected together and named for you. So this is early in their calling. This is first stuff. As soon as Jesus has called them to follow him, named them, set them apart, and said, now you 12, look what he does. He has them pray, and then he gives them authority, and he names in verse 2 them as, what's the word for them in verse 2? Apostles. The wonderful insight came from our Tuesday Bible study group a couple weeks ago at the Lemonagers' house. And all of the folks who were gathered there had a wonderful discussion on these disciples and becoming apostles and all of the things about that. That's how fast it happens. So the harvest is so plentiful. The laborers are so few. But what's the rest of the story? They pray. Jesus gives them authority. And they go out. And where did these 12 apostles go? You know the rest of the story. They went all over the world. And they shared the wonder of Jesus' love with the authority he had given them. And they did the very things Jesus promised to them that they would do. That you see, that he gave them the authority to do in verse 1. And so suddenly, just like last week, a simple Matthew or a very weak Gideon becomes exactly what Jesus calls them to be. A mighty man of God and an apostle. So, for the real rest of the story, who are you? Oh yes, Jesus calls you to follow him. He calls you. Follow me, he says to you, and you have no excuse as you read through that Romans passage. Doesn't matter weakness, doesn't matter sin, doesn't matter death, doesn't matter ungodly. Jesus calls you. That's who he came to call. Remember it says last week. You're precisely the one he came to call. For he came to call sinners. And then he takes sinners who see ourselves, know ourselves to be, with our human eyes such. And he proclaims something about you, asks you to pray, and then gives you authority and makes of you what you never were before. And through his calling, sends you out as apostle with his gifts, his authority. What a wonder that the world would see such a thing, and the world has. And that comes through you. You know that, don't you? That there are those entrusted to your care. That you are sent to them. God sent to them. That you are being sent by God. The word simply there then is apostle. Don't think of apostle as somehow this high station. Here it is called a particular apostle as a noun there in verse 2. But then they're sent to him in verse 5. And that word is a verb. You are sent out. You are to go and share that same message as every disciple is. Third, so this, it starts out, you see on the text itself, it says in verse 5, that to go nowhere among the Gentiles, to go only to the Jews. But what's the rest of the story? So we know that's how it started. Because God's love and commitment to the Jewish people, honoring the promises to Abraham. But we know the rest of the story, don't we? That they're to go, in Matthew 28, to the ends of the earth. That nobody is left out. And I'd just like you to think about a piece of the rest of the story that's revealed in this passage. Look at verse 8. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. Oh, we had one of those just Friday morning, didn't we? One of that little piece. What a wonder, what a blessing. But the piece I'd like you to look at now is this next one. You receive without pay, give without pay. This is God's economy. Right there. God's economy is revealed. I know we got lots of people thinking about God's economy and what is that? Well, here is the principle of it. It's called a gift economy. And this is an economy that, if you want to know the rest of the story, has changed the world already. And being yours changes you. God's economy is a wondrous thing. It's not a market economy. It's not a communist economy. It is God's economy. It's gift. A gift economy. So I would like you just to think about the wonder of what it is when there is a people who follow Jesus, who are disciples, that are then made apostles, and they go everywhere in the world, and they're thinking of what they have, and the needs of the world that are still filled with harassed and helpless sheep. And they say, I know what I shall do. I shall give. So how does that change the world? Well, it meant that there were Christians just like you. Many of them widows. And those widows, because they thought this was the thing they had available to do, and they had support from the congregations, this was early church, they would go out into the hillsides where people were abandoning babies. There were people who were too poor. And for other reasons, they said, I don't want this child. And so they would abandon them to be exposed, and they would die either from beasts or from exposure. And these widows, by and large, would go scouring 2 by 2 around the hillsides. And they would collect those children. And they brought those children into their homes. And they raised those children. Now, did they say to those children, here's how much this costs you? No. Freely they had received, and freely they gave to those who were harassed and helpless. What a wonder of a gift economy! And so orphanages in the Christian manner were born. And there were those who said people are passing through and they need a place to stay, and they opened up their big home, or some later in tradition developed as the centuries passed, even group homes like monasteries I'm talking about, opened up their spaces for hospitality and people to stay. And they called them hospitals. And slowly those hospitals became places for care of those who were harassed and helpless, who couldn't do anything on their own. And they were taken there. And freely they received from that place all the care and the love and attention that it could give. And that's the way it still is today, isn't it? You walk into St. Mary's, and it says right there on the wall as you're passing through the little corridor on the third floor, care of the sick must be before and above all else if they're to be cared for in the name of Christ and as Christ. Wow! Then you just say, here is. Now, of course, this gift economy, wherever it's gone in the world, when you think about the likes of orphanages and hospitals, it's changed the world, hasn't it? It's actually impacted the nations and made the whole nations function and think and work differently. It's changed cultures. God's economy is a marvelous thing. It starts from this great, great gift, the gift of His Son, that's given fully and completely to you, without condition, lays down His life for you, gives His all for you. And if He's given you His only Son, what more would He ever withhold from you? Do you think anything is withheld from you in heavenly blessings? Not one thing. And so He gives, and He gives, and He gives, and He gives. And He sends them, after calling you out and sending you into a new status that you never were before and thought you never could be. And then He sends you all over the world, and He sends you out to give yourself away with such love like that. Well, that's the rest of the story. All these points, there's been so much that has happened since these words were taking place in the life of Matthew as well as Peter and James and John. But this is the stuff that starts with being a disciple. Moves through to you. And the rest of the story is that it doesn't end with you. He's got a love still for anyone who's harassed and helpless, for anyone out there who's a weak, ungodly sinner.